Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving deep into what is absolutely one of the most infamous, brutal, and honestly consequential battles in all of human history, the Battle of Stalingrad. We're going to break down exactly why this one specific city became the ultimate prize for two dictators, how the horrifying reality of urban combat actually unfolded on the ground, and how a really stunning reversal of fortune permanently altered the trajectory of World War II.
Okay, let's dive into this. Look at this staggering number. 2 million. That's the estimated number of total casualties we're talking about here. That includes military and civilian, dead and wounded, all across just 199 days of fighting. Between August 1942 and February 1943, the equivalent of a massive modern city's entire population was either wiped out or severely injured in a single geographical location. I mean, this number alone immediately establishes the sheer scale and the unimaginable gravity of this conflict.
So, Section 1, the ultimate strategic prize. Why did Hitler and Stalin choose this specific battlefield?
Now, you might be asking yourself, why didn't Hitler just push straight for Moscow again, right? Like he did the previous winter? Why shift the entire focus of the massive German military machine to this specific industrial center sitting way out on the banks of the Volga River?
Well, the motivations were this crazy mix of cold strategy and really dark political obsession. Strategically, Stalingrad was a massive industrial hub. Actually, more than that. Capturing it would sever the Volga River, which was a vital shipping artery. That would effectively cut off central Russia from the oil-rich Caucasus region, specifically Baku, and it would totally disrupt the Allied Lend-Lease supplies coming up through the Persian corridor. But you know, it was also deeply symbolic. This city literally bore the name of Joseph Stalin. Hitler desperately wanted the propaganda victory of destroying Stalin's namesake. He even issued this chilling order that upon capture, all male citizens were to be killed and the women and children deported. So the stakes, they literally couldn't have been higher. Which brings us to Section 2, into the urban meat grinder, and the reality of total combat.
The Soviet defense was rooted in just absolute desperation. Stalin issued Order No. 227, which famously decreed not a step back. And listen, this wasn't just some inspirational rallying cry, it was a lethal directive. Anyone surrendering or retreating without orders faced a military tribunal or immediate execution. Retreat was flat-out banned. Barrier troops were deployed to shoot deserters, and penal battalions were created. It deliberately turned the city into an inescapable bloodbath.
And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of total war. Both sides fully embraced an absolute brutality that approached theoretical absolute war. I mean, the first priority was victory at absolutely any cost. Collateral damage wasn't just ignored here. The total destruction of the environment basically became part of the battlefield itself.
We can clearly see this in how the two sides fought. The German strategy relied on heavy Luftwaffe bombing raids, massive artillery strikes, and then pushing forward with tanks and infantry. They literally reduced much of the city to absolute rubble. But the Soviet 62nd Army, under General Vasily Chukov, they adapted brilliantly to this. They turned that very rubble into lethal fortresses. They seeded it with minefields, barbed wire, booby traps. They engaged in brutal close-quarters combat and adopted what they called hugging tactics. That meant staying so close to the German front lines that the Luftwaffe and German artillery couldn't actually strike without hitting their own men.
This common Soviet saying really anchored their whole defense. They had nowhere to retreat to anyway. The incredibly wide Volga River was right at their backs. To give you an idea of the ferocity here, at this giant grain elevator in the south of the city, about 50 Red Army defenders were completely cut off. For 5 straight days, they fought over this single structure. They repelled 10 different German assaults before finally running out of ammo and water. It was literally house-to-house, room-to-room combat.
Let's move to Section 3, the Soviet counteroffensive, springing the trap.
The physical strain on the commanders inside the city was immense. General Paulus developed a severe eye tic, and General Chuikov's hands were completely bandaged from stress-induced eczema. But while the city itself was a bloodbath, a massive strategic reversal was being planned right outside of it. Look at this timeline. In August, the Germans are the unstoppable aggressors, but by November, the Soviets spring a massive trap. By December, the Germans are entirely cut off. And by February 1943, the finest infantry army in the German military surrenders. Let's look at exactly how they pulled this off.
The key to the Soviet victory was Operation Uranus. This was masterminded by General Zhukov and Vasilevsky. They realized something crucial. While the elite German Sixth Army was completely bogged down inside the city, the northern and southern flanks out in the steppes were dangerously overstretched. They were being weakly defended by Romanian and Italian units that really lacked anti-tank weapons. So the Soviets just punched right through those weak flanks, creating a massive pincer movement that met behind the city. They snapped a trap shut and completely encircled up to 300,000 Axis troops in a massive pocket.
Now, even trapped, the Germans could have potentially broken out early on, but Hitler absolutely refused to let Paulus retreat. No way. Instead, he relied on this disastrous promise from Hermann Göring, who claimed the Luftwaffe could supply the trapped Sixth Army by air. But just look at the mathematical impossibility of this airlift. The army needed 750 tons of supplies daily just to survive and fight. The Luftwaffe, hampered by terrible weather and Soviet attacks, managed an average of only 105 tons.
So the crucial point is this. It wasn't just Soviet bullets that broke the German Sixth Army. It was logistics and nature. The Soviet blockade cut off all ground access. Then, the brutal Russian winter set in, with temperatures dropping tens of degrees below freezing. Without food, without fuel, or even adequate winter clothing, the trapped German forces were utterly ravaged by starvation and disease. The hunter had completely become the hunted.
This brings us to Section 4, the global turning point, and the shockwaves of the Soviet victory.
In late January 1943, Hitler actually promoted Paulus to field marshal. And this was a thinly veiled suggestion to commit suicide, right? Because no German field marshal had ever surrendered in history. But Paulus defied Hitler, and he surrendered on February 2nd. By the end of the battle, nearly 100,000 German soldiers marched into Soviet captivity. This was a staggering psychological blow to the Third Reich. It was actually the very first failure of the war publicly acknowledged by Hitler's government. The German public was finally told of the disaster, and it fundamentally changed the mood in Berlin from triumphant to genuinely fearful. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how losing over 200,000 dead at Stalingrad triggered a massive global domino effect. For the Germans, it completely shattered the myth of Wehrmacht invincibility. Strategically, the initiative on the Eastern Front shifted permanently to the Soviets. Germany would literally never win another major battle in the East. And globally, news of the Soviet victory sent this massive surge of hope across occupied Europe. It instantly inspired spikes in strikes and acts of sabotage in places like occupied France and Italy.
And on the Soviet side, morale just soared. This popular saying quickly took hold: "You cannot stop an army which has done Stalingrad." This specific, incredibly brutal victory served as a profound catharsis. It salvaged a shattered nation's pride. It set the Soviet Union firmly on the road to becoming a global superpower, because it proved they could absolutely defeat the finest collection of divisions the German army had ever fielded.
So, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. The strategic brilliance of Operation Uranus, the totally unimaginable endurance of the soldiers fighting in the rubble, and that devastating winter chokehold, they all combined to create the pivotal turning point of the entire European theater. Without this victory, without the incredible sacrifice of millions right there at the Volga River, the map of modern Europe and the outcome of the Second World War as a whole might look entirely different today. Definitely keep that in mind next time you're looking at a history book. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep learning.